Welcome to the Comm Up, a podcast dedicated to educating and empowering early career communicators. Today, we cover internal and executive communications with a very special guest.
My name is Vibeka Sen Sisodiya, and I have been a communications professional for roughly 25 years, I want to say. And that has included working in corporate communications across various functions and also doing consulting on my own, communications consulting. My career trajectory has been from kind of doing PR, corporate communications, and kind of evolved and morphed into employee / internal communications and executive communications, and which is where I landed the last, I would say, 10, 15 years of my career was solely focused on exec comms, which is an extension, or I would say an evolution of internal comms.
Very cool. So kind of playing up off of what you've done with your career, what does communication mean to you? And I know that's a very, very big question, but in the context of what you've dedicated your career to and the stakeholders you've helped to elevate, what does that mean to you at large?
I want to step back and even make it more basic. I think communication to me is how we humans connect with each other, how we share experiences with each other and learn from each other. I think that really, to me, sums up what communication is.
I think that that's why so many people go into this industry, is for that element of connection, because certain people do have that gift to elevate and connect. And so that's a really great way of looking at that. A little bit more concrete, what is your communication style? What can you describe it in 3 words?
Good question. So I would say my communication style is direct, it's authentic, and it's empathetic. I would say those are 3 words.
That's great. I like that. Authentic and empathetic. Especially when you were talking about how you kind of landed into the internal comms realm. I think we were talking earlier that authenticity is so relevant to communicating with a very close at hand public. So that's really cool. What's your favorite content creation medium?
So I think I like consuming content, via social media, because that seems to be the platform du jour. But I do like long form in the sense of blogs. I really like the storytelling that goes behind blogs. So kind of diving beyond the surface, which I think that's very conducive to. And that is also my ideal platform for content creation myself. So I think I would say long form and especially blogs.
Amazing. What is your stance on vlogs or video blogs as they kind of gain popularity?
I think you have to know how to do them right. I think video blogs it's very essential to be succinct and be able to capture your audience. And as long as you can do that and do it in a way where you're engaging and holding your audience's attention via storytelling, whatever it is you're doing, I think it's great. But you have to be very mindful that it is also a platform that does not lend itself to a lot of long forms, unless it's a TED Talk or something. I rarely see a vlog that is, long and engaging at the same time. I think you have to be very, it depends on the subject matter. It depends on your delivery and how succinct and engaging you can make it.
Awesome. I'm an avid consumer of video essays, and I do notice that there's a lot of quick cuts that need to be employed in graphics, because as our, attention span dwindles, so does our ability to consume video content in anything less than those 2-minute bursts. And I think when you're reading a blog, you have a little bit more control over your time and the flow of it and taking breaks and all of that. I think the written word is not as out of favor as people like to make it sound.
Hopefully, yeah.
Yes, hopefully. So we're going to move into talking about your experience in internal and exec comms, because that's such a niche that a lot of us in college don't really learn about or know about pursuing in the long term. So just to kind of get a general understanding of it, what is the end goal of internal comms? And, if we want to expand on that too, the end goal of executive comms, that would be great.
Okay. I think the end goal of internal comms is really to engage, inform, and inspire employees so they feel closely connected to a company's purpose and values and are directly in alignment with its business priorities. So it's really essentially about connecting, informing, and activating employees and making sure that they're all aligned, not just to the company's priorities, but also the company's values and purpose. And in the same vein, exec comms to me, as the end goal is to enable a leader of a company to inspire, align, and connect with their employees so they feel empowered to execute on business priorities. Same vein, but also added to that has to be in a format that is transparent and tone that is authentic and also shares values, so you can connect with employees to the sharing of values and purpose.
Yeah. I really like that. And so, when you talk about connecting employees to that shared value and purpose, you also mentioned authenticity earlier. Where does that authenticity piece really come in, where maybe it doesn't so present itself in PR?
Yep. So I think when you are doing PR or marketing or something that's external facing, you always need to put your best foot forward. You always have to sort of maintain this veneer because you want to be perceived a certain way. I believe when it comes to employee communications, I'm not saying that the external communications is inauthentic, but you also have a certain degree of polish to it. I feel that you cannot BS, in lack of a better word, your own employees because they need to be fully on deck, on board with what you're doing, where you're doing well, where you're failing. The authenticity comes in the way you interact with your employees. If you're transparent and authentic with them in how you present information, the good and the bad, then you will have them on board with you. So that's what I think is the key differentiator in my mind, is that you can always show, the good and the bad, the warts, along with all the good things with employees, because they would in the long term gain from it, and you will gain from it because they will be on the same page with you. So that's very important.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think I like what you said about like you can't BS your own employees. I think that you need to have that level of transparency. So that makes sense. And I think that that kind of goes really nicely into my next question, which is why did you choose to go the internal comms route and, deviate from more of an external facing role? And, what did that professional journey look like?
Yeah, so I got my bachelor's degree in print journalism and then my master's in broadcast. And I did not land my first job in that field because jobs are few and far in between in that, in those days. So I ended up, my first job was in PR with an agency, which I quickly realized was not where my heart was. It's great for a lot of people. It just wasn't something that I felt very passionate about. In my next role, I transitioned from PR into corporate communications, which is kind of a broader umbrella of internal and external communications. And I started enjoying that more. And then eventually I kind of deliberately found my way into internal/employee communications because I felt, as we discussed before, that allowed me to connect with employees and people, my colleagues more authentically, and also allowed me to indulge probably more in my passion for storytelling, because when you connect with somebody, a fellow human, storytelling is essential, and we'll talk about that later. So that was my journey. And once I landed on internal comms, I kind of knew I was where I wanted to be. And so then I basically did internal communications, which then morphed into an exec comms role eventually.
Cool. And I think that that is how a lot of, I think it also kind of goes to demonstrate that there are so many specific niches that people would do well to learn about early on. But it's super cool how you just kind of felt it, like it had a natural path and flow for you, which is, I think, what anyone can really hope for when they're getting started. So, did you ever work on internal and exec comms teams at the same time? How did you make that specific transition?
So I did. I think part of my corporate communications function was doing internal, external, and exec comms for a smaller company. But as I moved on to bigger companies and had more experience under my belt, and the internal comms, which is more of a general writing to employees about product announcements, about employee issues, etc. I wanted to steer my way into doing more exec comms, senior executive leadership, thought leadership, and communications. So I think it was at some point, yes, I kind of did them in parallel, but it eventually kind of morphed into the exec comms route for me. So I think I do believe that when you start off in a career of internal communications and want to at some point elevate your skills to exec comms, I think it's really, really important that you do internal communications and kind of get a sense of all the platforms that are at your disposal, how to bring together employees, whether it's physically, whether it's through communication platforms. Understanding that then helps you be that thought leadership/communication partner to the leader, because you understand the platforms, you have been a part of that, entrenched in it, and now you can kind of elevate your executives' messaging and apply the right platforms for the right audiences. So I kind of feel like it's a good organic kind of progression.
Okay, and that kind of ties into that theme of like things kind of naturally move on. When you talk about bringing employees together in an internal comms role, is that, just curating communications for them, or is there also, planning those events? Kind of what goes into that?
Absolutely. I think it's the yin and the yang. You have to, there's the written word or post, and then there's the actual gathering employees through all hands meetings, through, any event that brings people together, because especially in the post-COVID world, we don't have that luxury, but it is so essential for employees to connect with each other and with their leadership. So I think it's absolutely, I would say equal weight in a lot of ways. Yes, in today's new reality of remote working, globalization. Obviously, the written word is probably in a lot of ways more effective because we can't necessarily always bring employees together. But being able to bring employees together, whether it's in a regional way or it's in a global format, it's so essential for them to see their leaders and their fellow colleagues and make those bonds, those connections, because then you're on the same page, and then you have those shared experiences, which are absolutely critical to a positive employee experience.
It sounds to me that when you're in an internal role, you're holistically looking at the employee experience and how your
Absolutely.
communications ladder into that. But as you move forward to executive comms, it's less about connecting employees with other employees and more so about connecting that executive with the employees and amplifying their message.
Yep.
What would you say are the three most important facets of internal comms?
I think first and foremost, a clear understanding of your messaging goals, the audience, and your desired outcomes. I think that's number one. Number two is having an authentic narrative, authentic, clear narrative, what your messaging is going to be. And also, the final thing is building trust with your audience, not just through the word, but through a two-way communication channel. Internal comms, a lot of people think of it as a one-way traffic. It is absolutely not. I think it is not effective unless it's a two-way, where you're also getting employee feedback formally and informally, and we can talk about that later. So I think basically, to summarize, clear understanding of what you're trying to communicate to whom and what you're trying to get out of it. What exactly is your messaging or narrative? And also making sure that you're building the relationship and trust with the employees by also soliciting their feedback and input.
Absolutely. Have those core tenets kind of stayed the same throughout your career in internal comms?
No, I think all three of those still stand. I think every time I approach something, it's always with those three things in mind. Yeah, I wouldn't say they have changed.
So the needs are always the same. But as we discussed, sometimes the internal comms as a whole does change. Is it still 100% of like an internal discipline, with the advent of social media and other things?
Back when, in the dark ages, when I did internal communications, it was quite a siloed, I think, field in a lot of ways, because we were only worried about or thinking about the employees, talking to the employees only. However, as the world has evolved and social media has become part of our lives, while the primary focus of internal communications is still employees, I think internal comms today is just one cog on the fast-paced corporate comms wheel, which includes PR, as you know, branding, marketing, social media, corporate strategy, investor and analyst relations, executive thought leadership. So everything, every single cog forms that entire wheel. And therefore, it's so imperative that consistency and clarity is achieved across all these platforms, because employees are now accessing not just what you're saying to them directly, but they're also accessing every single platform or have access to. So they're privy to everything that a company is saying and doing internally and externally. So internal comms has to be in lockstep with all the other communication streams now. So that's the evolution. While you're still have the employee interests at heart, you also need to make sure you are thinking over the broader picture of what you're saying as a company as well.
Absolutely. And does that kind of play into expectations of the organization as treating employees a certain way or elevating certain stakeholders and narratives to be more in line with that potential external perception?
Absolutely. I think it is very important, depending on what you're trying to get across and what your outcomes are, to find the right stakeholder. And ideally, that stakeholder could be your internal and as well as your external spokesperson. It could be that they're not, but usually it helps because then you have messaging clarity and consistency. So I do think it matters, especially if you're going to do exec comms, to find that one executive that has that presence, that trust and respect and the authenticity to speak to employees, but also to the external stakeholders like, investors, the media, customers, and be able to do that in a way that is consistent and be seen as an authority on the messaging. So yes, absolutely.
And then, so when you kind of go into that, how do you typically discern what the right stakeholder is to tap or the right communicator is to tap in that sort of scenario?
Two things. I think their understanding of, so basically, depending on your communications objectives, you need to find the right person who has the expertise as well as the trust, as I mentioned, the respect, but also make sure that they they are comfortable in their communication skills, or at least help them build those communication skills, because they may have the expertise but not the communication skills. So you have to work with them closely to make sure that they come across as a holistic communicator, both internally and externally. A lot of times execs have the skills built in, and it's great. A lot of times you have to go through media training and just communications training with them to get them to that level. But at the end of the day, you need to find somebody that can authentically and authoritatively speak to the topic at hand and what you're trying to get across.
Yeah. And so, like, when you are choosing that person, I think sometimes there are topics that are tough, right? Like looking at the impact of, worldwide events on, your employees, which are really just a microcosm of the world. Is it difficult sometimes to handle those tough topics when they come through, when the audience is a public and culture that you know so intimately? These are the people you go to work with every day. Is it ever tough to handle that?
I think it's a kind of two sides to the coin. Knowing your audience intimately is a great thing, because then you know exactly what matters to them, what resonates with them, what they want to hear and how they want to hear it. But also on the flip side of it, it can also lead to complacence, I think, because you feel like you know your audience. Therefore, this should be a slam dunk, which it isn't. So the one thing you have to always be mindful for is that, yes, you may know a good cross section of your audience, but just like today's world, the audience is as diverse as the world is. And there are always going to be, substreams of people that are going to see things differently or approach something differently. So you need to always, always, always have the broadest focus in mind, and never assume that you know exactly what your audience is going to, how they're going to react to it, because 9 times out of 10, there will be somebody or some group that will not see it the same way just because you think that, oh, it should be clear enough. So always, always, always make sure that whatever you're communicating is something that you believe will reach and resonate with as many people as possible. You can reach everybody, but also make sure that, you're taking, just because this feels like the right approach and the right messaging, always step back before, you deploy it to say, okay, if I was not of this mindset, would I still view or receive the message the same way? So you've always got to keep that open mind.
Absolutely. And when it comes to keeping that open mind to how things might be received, is there ever like a general idea sometimes that you're able to predict how something will be received?
I think history is a great teacher. So I think you always look at past campaigns. If you have the luxury of seeing how other campaigns that are similar in messaging and outreach were, seeing what worked, what needs to be tweaked, evolved. That's why communications metrics are so, so, so important, and feedback as well. And so by that, I mean, every time you're doing a communications campaign, you should find some way to measure your outreach, short and long term. It could be through employee engagement pulse surveys. It could be through built-in metrics like, page visits, click-throughs, open rates, etc. And finally, don't underestimate the power of one-to-one communication. So once you're sending out a communication, do an informal outreach to your colleagues, to somebody across the pond somewhere, and say, hey, how did you receive it? And ask them for frank feedback, because that is the only way you'll know if it's working or not. Because you could be sitting in your communications tower and sending out all these incredible communications, but it may not miss, it may miss their mark. And a lot of times, formal feedback may not be the only way to get feedback, but go reach out and talk to your colleagues and see, did it work? How did they receive it? What could have been done better? So I think it's a combination of learning from past experiences and always, always, always going after the communications has been deployed, talking to people, soliciting feedback, getting.
Absolutely. And when we talk about that data, I remember earlier you mentioning that there are some hard skills and analytical skills that you would want to deploy. And while a huge part of predicting that is to go out there and get that qualitative feedback, what are some hard skills that are important to have in your arsenal to make sure that you're getting the holistic picture of how things might, reach
Right.
your audience?
So I think we talked about the fact that understanding of the different platforms that we've got, we've got video, social media, we've got, long form, short form, we've got thought leadership opportunities, we've got, lots of other things. You have to understand how a messaging will need to play out across those platforms. And secondly, having a good knowledge of the latest software that's there. If you're going to do a vlog, for example, understanding what the video software is, understanding the metrics and tools that communicators are using to get feedback, and also the platforms. It could be a workplace or an intranet, right? So different companies have different ways. So understanding the medium as well. I think those are so critical to as hard skills, to understand the platform, the metrics tools, and also how to build the best messaging for each of them.
Absolutely. And I think that that is something when you talk about kind of learning how to build your messaging through those metrics, that I think some people don't talk about in comms a lot, which is it is important to have that kind of qualitative and analytical mindset when approaching comms. When did you kind of feel that you had a handle of being able to look at that picture holistically from, qualitative, but then also like have that really good handle on being able to discern kind of what the impact is from those quantitative markers?
I think, like I said, employee feedback. I think measurement. So, in one of the companies I worked at, we did these very strategic all hands for the organization. It was a combination of business communications as well as kind of employee engagement and experience. And the one thing that we would measure on a quarterly basis is like, okay, what's the employee engagement index for that? How has it shifted one way or another? What kind of content is working? What's not? Try something different, have a different segment one quarter and see how that lands. So it really is, and we were able to over time kind of figure out, and of course with informal feedback, figure out like what people wanted to hear, who they wanted to hear from, at each of these events, which were like attended by about like 8 to 10,000 people because it was a big organization. So I think it's a trial and error basis, but you kind of then you land because you also see people engaging, people coming, the numbers, people looking at the content, clicking through, and of course the feedback. So you will never not always hit your mark, but I think if you keep those, again, the lines of communication open, you will get the valuable data that you're seeking to see how to tweak along the way.
That's awesome. So, we've discussed a bit about how you interpret that data and how you build a successful campaign internally. But when you kind of look at it from, again, a bottom line perspective, how do you think internal communicators make an impact? And how do you see, what are the markers of an organization that has a really good internal comms program and is really seeking to connect with their employees?
So, okay, the first question is how do internal communicators make an impact? I think
Yes.
I'm definitely biased in that, but I do believe that internal communications is really the backbone to the success of a company. And the reason why I say that is because if you do not have an informed, engaged, activated employee base who are directly aligned with the company's business priorities, its leadership and culture, you do not have a company that'll succeed at the end of the day. Right. And that's where I brought up the whole you can't BS your employees. You have to make sure that they're along for the ride. In terms of what are the markers of a company that engages in internal communication successfully, I think it's making companies whose leadership believe communications is a key priority for them, not just externally, but especially to their employees. Companies that invest in that, in their employee experiences and employee improvement, and companies whose leadership have an authentic voice and want to be authentic to their employees. That is so, so important for the success because you could create all the most effective campaigns, but if you do not have the right person behind them, I think you will definitely not succeed because employees can see through BS and if you have somebody that's very powerful and charismatic and authentic and trustworthy, then half your battle is won because you have the right person in place. I think just making communications to employees a priority and putting your words where your mouth is so important for a company.
Yeah. And I really like that kind of like bottom line view of what internal communications is and why it's important and what the hallmarks are of a good program. So, we've kind of delved a bit into what makes an internal communicator successful, why it's important, and how it works. Now, I think that hopefully, as we spoke, there are some folks who are recent grads or still, wrapping up college that have had their interest piqued and are really, really interested in moving forward and learning more and trying to actively pursue a career in internal comms. Would love to get some advice from you for them. And the first question I have on that is when you are hiring, because you've hired many people over the course of your career, what do you look for in a portfolio, resume, or cover letter when hiring for a comms professional? And, what makes someone who maybe has less on that resume, who's still young or less experienced, stand out when they're applying?
It's a great question. I think when it's somebody that's early in career, just having an understanding, a general understanding, and it only comes with experience of the platforms that we talked about, the various platforms, and when to apply what. Obviously you're going to get guidance, but to understand the medium and the messaging, how to message it accordingly is very important. Being able to be hungry and open to learning and asking questions, I think is so important. And even you can gauge a person's curiosity and hunger to learn when you talk to them in an interview. They, especially early in career, you should just be a sponge. You should just be asking questions and just saying, okay, so how do you do this? How do you do that? And I want to see that hunger. I also like to see creativity in whatever portfolio you have, your ability to, take risks, and they may not work. And that is a good thing because at least you're trying. So seeing kind of a diverse portfolio in terms of, you've done videos, you've done social media posts, LinkedIn posts, you've done Instagram, your ability to understand the medium again and the messaging, storytelling, writing skills would be great to have some decent writing samples, a variety of it again. And I think to me, when I hire somebody, whether it's early in career or, more advanced, is I'm always, first and foremost, skill sets can be learned, I always say, but a culture fit is either there or not. So you have to make sure that this person would fit with the culture of the team and the company, because I can always teach an early in career, train them, guide them, mentor them. But if I don't feel that they're going to be a good fit, then I'm not doing them a service, or nor am I doing myself a service by hiring them. So that's very important.
Yeah. I like that. I like that kind of holistic, like that overall view of all the different components that go into it, because it's not just a resume. I think that talking about that
Absolutely.
cultural fit is something that I think when you are young and hungry, your thought is an opportunity is an opportunity. So now think about that culture fit. But that is something important that can only help you succeed. What kind of person would you say is most successful in internal comms? What are some of those traits that go beyond, looking at that portfolio, that hiring process, and translate into on the career success?
I think, again, I will repeat, what I said earlier. Like, I think skill sets can be learned on the job, or, based on a company and what it focuses on. I think the hunger to learn, the confidence to take risks, good educated risks, I think it's extremely important. Having the energy and initiative too, right? You see that energy in a person that really wants to try things and grow. I think it's so important in any career. I'm not talking just about internal communications, in any career for that matter. And I think it's this basically, for somebody who's early in career does not have all the answers. They're not expected to have all the answers. What they're expected to have is the energy, the curiosity, the hunger, like you mentioned. And that to me is the markers for success. If they keep that alive, I think they'll go far. And if they have the right mentors leading them.
And I think that the kind of focus on mentorship is something that I definitely am looking for as I, continue applying for jobs and looking into something full time. I think mentorship it's worth its weight in gold. I like the emphasis on that. On the kind of note of mentorship, what is the best piece of advice you've received over the course of your career?
I think it's something I said. I think I just is ask questions. You're not expected to have all the answers. That's it.
Absolutely. So kind of don't feel embarrassed, even if it
Nope.
feels like a
Even,
naive
yeah, it
conversation.
doesn't matter how advanced or early in career you are. If you don't ask the questions, you will not get the right answers, and you'll not have all the right knowledge to do your job successfully. And I have always asked questions, and sometimes you're the only one asking the question, but it turns out it's a question that's been on everybody's mind, but somebody has to ask it. And sometimes maybe you didn't understand it, and it's okay. It's okay to get clarification, because rather do that before you work on something than after, when it's too late.
Right.
So I always believe in asking questions.
I think that's, yeah, asking questions. All right. That is a great piece of advice. And so I think this is a bit more of like a nebulous question, but has there been an event, activity, or habit you've implemented in your personal life that's made you a better professional communicator?
I wouldn't say it's necessarily, and I think maybe it will not answer your question in the way you anticipate, but I think it's not necessarily an event or activity. It's more like my background. I was an only child and my dad was a diplomat. So we traveled every 3-4 years to different parts of the world, and with different languages, different cultures. And, I couldn't make any friends until I learned the language and went out and made friends. I think that has always helped me, because I'm not afraid of going out there and making friends or connecting with people, because that was kind of a survival tactic for me growing up. And I think the ability to have that hunger to make connections with people is something that I feel has really helped me in my career. Because people want you to show interest in them and what they're doing. Any human being does. And when you can do that in an authentic way, and you learn so much from them and they learn from you. So I think that has really helped me in my career.
Yeah. And that does answer my question really well. And I think that kind of focus on authenticity really ties in with some of the other stuff you said, which is if you're going to make a living off of talking to people, it makes sense that you'd want to do it in a way that feels genuine when you're
Yep.
trying to build that connection.
Yep.
Definitely see how that could help you build a communication style that would be really advantageous. So yeah, that's super cool. Also, it's super cool that you just like grew up traveling. That's really sick.
Yeah. I was very fortunate. Didn't feel like that when I was growing up, but now
I'm
looking
sure.
back, I wouldn't trade it for the world.
I get that. I think that like everything feels different in hindsight, and so
Hmm.
totally get that. Moving into our final section, it's a news discussion. So,
Hmm.
um, I thought I wanted to end this with like a little conversation about something that's been on the news that's very relevant to both facets of your career, which is that employee piece and that executive piece.
Hmm.
The JP Morgan Chase kind of fallout. For those that
Hmm.
aren't aware, JP Morgan Chase's CEO, Jamie Dimon, held a all company town hall where he basically,
Hmm.
stated that the RTO, return to office, for their institution was not optional. However, people were asking questions and, there had been quite a bit of pushback against it, and he kind of exploded in this really crazy fashion where he, used a lot of expletives in a very professional
Hmm.
setting, expressed a lot of discontent. And so that kind of funneled into a lot of backlash internally for them, where employees felt that their executive was very disconnected with them. And then the internal comms team went into overdrive, and there were reports of suppression of internal communication platforms and that employees weren't really able to discuss internally the fallout from what had happened. As someone who's
Hmm.
very much an expert in that area, what are some of your kind of initial thoughts on that?
So I see it from both standpoints. I see it from the employee who's receiving the information standpoint. I also see it from the executive standpoint. So I'll try to actually step back and say, kind of talk about the way it kind of rolled out. I think they should have done it's when it's very critical, especially for something that is as emotionally charged for so many people now post COVID. They should have done focus groups before they rolled it out to see what kind of reactions they would have gotten from employees from different facets of the company. That is just such a must to do. I don't know if they did it, but it doesn't seem like it. It kind of feels like he came out and did a mandate without, without the team thinking through, okay, how is this going to be, how are people going to react to it? What are some of the reactions people will have to it that we can mitigate beforehand and address, most importantly? We did something similar in one of my roles. Obviously, post-COVID, RTO was return to office was everything. Like it took up, I would say, 70% of our time when we had a strategy in place. But before we put a strategy in place, we exhaustively talked to employees and leadership at different areas, and had these conversations saying, okay, what is your sense of, we want to do this. Does that kind of align with what you think the employees would want? We'd ask managers that and then asking employees. At the end of the day, yes, it is the executives and the company's decision. But at the end of the day, the people you're talking to are the people you want them to come back, right? So you have to make sure that you are taking their reactions, emotions, needs into consideration by doing having these discussions, and figuring out what the good and the bad scenarios would be and seeing how much you can mitigate at the onset before you even set it out. I'm not saying you should influence your strategy if that's what you've landed on, but you actually need to do your homework before you do something of that stature and that big a mandate. So I think maybe, or they did, or they didn't, or maybe they ignored it. I don't know what the scenario was. So I think that was something that should have been done, because then the messaging would have been, even though, obviously the CEO has a stance on it and, that this is how they want it to be. It could have been done in a better way, in a more inclusive manner, which it wasn't. And then they lost that opportunity because when things kind of fell apart, he seems to have dug his heels in, and that just doesn't help because people just react emotionally. And then, then you've kind of sort of lost your employees, and trying to get them back is harder. The fact that they had to turn off the comments on the internal platform, this has happened before in my experience as well. When there's an overwhelming reaction to something, it inundates the platform, it dilutes the conversation, it takes it in different directions. And so I think at some point it is wiser to kind of stop that and say, okay, let's step back, regroup, let's have this conversation, and not just go crazy. One comment leads to 15 other people saying, yes, I agree, or what about this? Just kind of bringing it back in and saying, okay, can we have, and so I think what they should have, I understand why they turned off the comments. I think I understand why they did it, because it was just, the narrative was getting out of control. But what would have made sense at that point was for the leadership to say, hey, I understand, I see what the reactions are. How about we just have this conversation? Let us tell you where we're coming from. We understand that, acknowledging people's reactions. I feel like not acknowledging people's reactions is the first mistake. It's like, people have reactions, they're entitled to them, but you cannot just negate it saying this is the company's strategy and that's how we're going to do it. That's not how you make a company successful. Again, I said you have to bring your employees along for the journey. And if you're losing them on the way, then you're really not getting to where you need to go. So I think it would have been nice, what would have been in hindsight, and it's always 2020, and I have that vantage point, kind of putting in the cap on that, where it was exploding, and then kind of having maybe the CEO have an all hands, which I don't know if they did. I think he did, and then he again dug his heels in. But by that time, kind of my way or the highway language, and kind of acknowledged employees' reactions and their challenges with it. Like a lot of people, have children, other things that they have to take care of. And the last 3-4 years, they've been doing that. And now suddenly to turn that and say, no, you have to come in, it's hard. But giving that grace to them is so important. So I think, like I said, I could see it from the executive standpoint, but I also can see it from the employee standpoint. So I feel that, hindsight being 2020, I think more work should have been done at the onset before rolling something like this out. And the messaging could have been a lot more inclusive and acknowledging of employees and their challenges.
Well, all in all, it sounds like if you are looking at the data and you are doing your due diligence and trying to take a slower approach to things, you can mitigate a lot of this sort of fallout. Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for chatting with me today and for the breakdown of one of the news stories in this sphere.